Om Aganda Timarandasya Ganajana Shivakaya Chakshur Samyena Tajma Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him.
Krishna Kirtana Bhanana Tanapano.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back to this video series on the Bhagavad Gita as it is, translated by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are currently on Chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Arjuna opens Chapter 13 inquiring about the field of activities and the knower of the field. Krishna answers that the conditioned soul's body and that body's interaction with material world are his limited field of activities. Chapter 13 clearly explains that by humbly developing knowledge, one can become freed from material entanglement. It also explains that the living entity's entanglement within the material world is due to his association with the modes of material nature. Text number 1. Arjuna said, O my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field and the knower of the field, and of the knowledge and of the end of knowledge. The Blessed Lord then said, This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. O scion of Bharat, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its owner is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the field of activities is, and what its influences are. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings, especially in the Vedanta Sutra, and it is presented with all reasoning as to cause and effect. The 5 great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, the mind, the 5 senses, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, and the aggregate, the life symptoms, the convictions, all of these are considered, in summary, to be the field of activities and its interactions. Humility, brightlessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth and death, old age and disease, non-attachment to children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness and pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, resorting to solitary places, detachment from the general mass of people, acceptance the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I thus declare to be knowledge, and what is contrary to these is ignorance. In the second 6 chapters, Krishna spoke directly of himself and the glories of devotional service. In the third 6 chapters, beginning with chapter 13, Krishna discusses how Gyan leads to bhakti. Srila Prabhupada introduces the topics of the final 6 chapters in his purport to texts 1 and 2. Now starting with the 13th chapter, how the living entity comes in contact with the material nature and how he is delivered by the Supreme Lord through the different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge, and the discharge of devotional service are explained. Although the living entity is completely different from the material body, he somehow identifies himself with the body. This is also explained. Arjuna begins chapter 13 by asking about 6 topics. Arjuna requests knowledge about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, Kshetra, the field of activities, Kshetragan, the knower of the field of activities, Jnanam, knowledge, and Jayam, the object of knowledge. Krishna immediately begins to address Arjuna's third topic by identifying the body as the field of Kshetra. He also dealt with the fourth topic by saying that the soul is the knower of the field, Kshetragan. In text 3 through 7, Krishna explained the field of activities and the knower of the field. In text 3, he also began to explain knowledge, the fifth topic about which Arjuna inquired. Text 6 and 7, Krishna gave a more detailed explanation of the field of activities. Text 6 lists the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifest, the 10 senses, the mind, and the 5 6 objects, the 24 material elements. Text 7 described 7 qualities of the mind derived from the interactions of the 24 elements. These qualities are also within the realm of the living entity's field of activities. The field of activities for the conditioned soul can be compared to a playground in a backyard surrounded by a big fence. The child playing there has the freedom to play as he wishes, but he cannot extend his activities beyond the allotted field. He is limited by the fence. Similarly, the living entity is limited by the interactions of his body, mind, and karma, which constitute his field of activities. An earthworm, for example, has a very small field of activities. He cannot read, write, jump, or run. He can simply crawl through the dirt surface when it rains and crawl back into the soil when the rain stops. A dog has a relatively larger field of activities, and a human being a still larger one. One's kshetra is based on his karma. A wealthy child may possess many toys to play within his backyard, but he is still restricted by the fence. Although he may be proud of the scope of his playground and even think himself happy and free with his swing and toy car and sandbox, he is nevertheless absorbed only in an insignificant backyard. He knows nothing of life beyond the fence. Similarly, the living entity, according to the limitations of the body and mind he has received through his karma, cannot see beyond his limited field of activities. Text 8 through 12, Krishna listed 20 items that he declares to be knowledge, such as cleanliness, which, if developed, are favorable for spiritual advancement, and elements of the process of advancement such as approaching a bona fide spiritual master and perceiving the evils of birth, death, disease, and old age. Integrated as a process, these items are the means of acquiring transcendental knowledge or an accurate understanding of the body, the soul, and the supersoul. In the next set of verses, 13 through 19, Krishna addresses Arjuna's sixth topic, the object of knowledge. Text number 13. I shall now explain the noble, knowing which you will taste the eternal. This is beginningless, and it is subordinate to me. It is called Brahman, the spirit, and it lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes and faces, and he hears everything. In this way, the Supersoul exists. The Supersoul is the individual source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living entities. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. The Supreme Truth exists both internally and externally, in the moving and unmoving. He is beyond the power of all material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Although the Supersoul appears to be divided, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. He is the source of light and all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and the unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. Thus, the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Nature is said to be the cause of all material activities and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil amongst various species. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the SuperSoul. In text 14 through 18, lofty verses resembling the Upanishads, the SuperSoul has been described. These verses make it sound as though that which is knowable is the impersonal Brahman, until text 18, where Krishna's actual meaning becomes apparent. Srila Prabhupada, however, in each translation and purport, mercifully reveals Krishna's intention, that these verses describe the SuperSoul. Srila Prabhupada's purport strongly confirms that verse 14, which refers to the all-pervading, describes the SuperSoul, not the living entity. In his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 1, however, Srila Prabhupada describes that those who wish to understand this verse as referring to the living entity as the all-pervading may properly do so. The kingdom of God is unlimited. Therefore, the number of assisting hands of the Lord is also unlimited. Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, text 14 asserts that the Lord has his hands, legs, eyes, and mouths at every nook and corner of his creation. This means that the expansions and the differentiated parts and parcels called jivas or living entities are assisting hands of the Lord, and all of them are meant for rendering a particular pattern of service to the Lord. Finally, in text 18, Krishna clearly reveals the identity of the one he has been describing, the SuperSoul, who is within the heart of all. Srila Prabhupada kindly informed us earlier in his translations and purports to verses 14, 15, and 17 that the Supreme Knowable Object, who has been described as unknowable, is nevertheless situated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Srila Prabhupada cites several verses from the Svetasvarta Upanishad in substantiating that these Gita texts have been describing neither the living entity nor Brahman, but the SuperSoul. Krishna begins his explanation of how material nature, Prakriti, and the Purusha combine, referring to the soul in text 20, 22, and 24, and to the SuperSoul in text 23. Their union is described as anadi, beginningless. Speaking of this combination, Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, actually, the living entity is originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to their rebellious nature, they have become conditioned within material nature. It really does not matter how these living entities or superior entities of the Supreme Lord have come into contact with material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead knows, however, how and why this actually took place. Both the living entity and the Lord are changeless and eternal. Only the material nature undergoes vikara, transformation. Although the living entity remains unchanged, out of ignorance he identifies with the changes of his body. Krishna is actually the only Purusha, or predominating enjoyer. The jiva, in contrast, as described in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 5, is the subordinate energy. This subordinate energy is placed within the material energy and imagines themselves as a Purusha. Thus incarcerated and suffering within matter, the jiva focuses on his attempt on the impossible enjoying by exploiting creations of the modes of material nature. By their association with material nature, while in an enjoying spirit, a jiva traps himself in the cycle of repeated birth and death. Srila Prabhupada explains, the fact is that every individual living entity is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has the tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate nature. And thus, because they have this tendency, they are called marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can be situated either in the material energy or in the spiritual energy. The Lord, therefore, is always giving instructions from within and from without. From without, he gives instructions as stated in Bhagavad Gita. And from within, he tries to convince the living entity that their activities in the material field are not conducive to real happiness. Just give it up and turn your faith towards me. Then you will be happy. Text 24. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. That SuperSoul is perceived by some through meditation, by some through cultivation of knowledge, and by others through working without fruit of desire. Again, there are those who, although not conversant with scriptural knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from others, they also transcend the path of birth and death. O chief of the Bharts, whatever you see in existence, both moving and unmoving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. One who sees the SuperSoul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the SuperSoul is ever destroyed, actually sees. One who sees the SuperSoul in every living being and equal everywhere does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus he approaches the transcendental destination. One who can see all activities are performed by the body, which is created by material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities which are due to the different material bodies, he attains to the Brahman conception. Thus he sees that beings are expanded everywhere. Those with vision of eternity can see that the soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the body, although it is situated in that body. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all the universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. One who knowingly sees this difference between the body and the owner of the body, and can understand the process of liberation from this bondage, also attains the supreme gold. Text 24 through 26 describe the results of understanding this knowledge. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport, clear understanding of material nature, the SuperSoul, the individual soul, and their interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and enter to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. The SuperSoul is the object of knowledge, and 3 different methods of perceiving him mentioned in text 25 are described as follows. Meditation refers to an Astanga yogi meditating on Paramatma. Cultivation of knowledge refers to a Sankhya yogi practicing the instructions of Lord Kapila to know the SuperSoul. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan states that the practitioners of Sankhya Yoga have their philosophy as their primary means and meditation as their secondary means. Working without fruit of desires refers to Nishkam Karma Yoga. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan says that such persons may seek philosophical knowledge or meditate, but their primary means of understanding the Supersoul is detached work. Krishna has extensively discussed all three paths in the first 6 chapters of the Gita. Hearing with faith from authorities has great potency. It is by hearing from bona fide spiritual teachers that knowledge of who we are and how to act upon that understanding is obtained. Faith is not stagnant. It grows and develops over time. Faith needs to be fed with proper understanding for it to develop into love of God. The final section of this chapter, text 27 through 35, Krishna summarizes the information already presented and explains how to distinguish the field of activities, Kshetra, from the knower of the field of activities, Kshetragan. Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan explains that Prakriti and Jiva have been united since time immemorial. Krishna continues to describe their separated individual existences in the next verse. One should be neither disturbed nor envious. He must act properly and see the Supersoul, the ultimate sanctioning agent present in all beings. Krishna again states clearly that only the body changes. The soul is eternal and changeless. As suggested by the chapter titled Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, this chapter describes material nature, the Supersoul, and the living entity. Srila Prabhupada sums up the chapter's main points in his purport. The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body, the owner of the body, and the Supersoul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12. Then one can go on to the supreme destination. One can understand that this body is matter. It can be analyzed with its 24 elements. The body is the gross manifestation, and the subtle manifestation is the mind and psychological effects. The symptoms of life are the interaction of these features. But over and above this, there is the soul, and there is also the Supersoul. The soul and the Supersoul are two. This material body is working by the conjunction of the soul and the 24 material elements. One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as a combination of the soul and the material elements can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul becomes eligible to transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. That ends this episode. Thank you for watching. Hope you return when we will discuss chapter 14 entitled The Three Modes of Material Nature. Hare Krishna.
Bande Rupa Sanatana Raghujaga Sri Jiva Gopalakam Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tana Param Premam Tambani Vira Dhira Jana Priya Kana Nima Sajam Pujito Krishna Kirtana Gana